That's a $200,000 car! You want to tell me whose keys you're holding? I already told you it's mine!
You know, there are moments in life that change everything. Moments where someone's assumptions collide with reality so hard that careers end, lives shift, and the truth becomes impossible to ignore. This is one of those stories. Picture this. A brilliant blue Ferrari, gleaming under the Florida sun like liquid fire. The kind of car that turns heads, that makes people stop and stare, that represents not just money, but dreams realized. And standing next to it, filling the tank at a small-town gas station on a perfect April afternoon, is a young man in sweatpants and a white t-shirt. His name is David Chen, and in about 60 seconds, his peaceful road trip is about to become a nightmare. Because across the street, sitting in a patrol car with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, Officer Thomas Martinez is watching, and in his mind, the math isn't adding up. A young man who looks like David, dressed casually, standing next to a $250,000 sports car? Something's wrong with this picture. At least, that's what Martinez thinks. But let me back up, because to understand what's about to happen at this gas station, you need to understand who David Chen really is. And his story? It's the kind that should make you believe in possibility. Before we dive into what happened next, do me one favor. If you believe that hard work and success should never be treated like a crime, hit that subscribe button right now. And here's why you need to stay until the very end. What this officer didn't know was that his own body camera was about to become the evidence that would end his career. Every word he said, every assumption he made, all caught on tape. The ending? It's going to leave you speechless. Now, let's get into the full story. 15 years earlier, David was 19 years old, living in a cramped apartment in Seattle where the winter rain seemed to seep through the walls. His desk was secondhand, wobbling on uneven legs. His laptop flickered whenever the power cable shifted just wrong. And every night, while most teenagers his age were out with friends or scrolling through social media, David sat in that flickering glow, teaching himself to code. Line by line, error by error, hour by hour. He grew up in a neighborhood where dreams felt like luxuries most people couldn't afford, where the sound of sirens was more common than birdsong, where the most successful people anyone knew were the ones who got out and never looked back. But David, he had a different plan. He didn't just want to escape, he wanted to build something, so he got a job at a warehouse, working the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. His hands moved automatically, sorting packages, scanning barcodes, stacking boxes. But his mind was somewhere else entirely, working through problems in Python and JavaScript, mentally debugging code while his body went through the motions of manual labor. He slept 4 hours a night, sometimes less. He lived on gas station coffee and the stubborn, almost irrational belief that if he just worked hard enough, smart enough, relentlessly enough, he could create a life that looked nothing like the one he'd been born into. Picture him at 23, exhausted but electric with possibility, launching his first app. It was a scheduling tool for hourly workers, the kind of problem he understood personally because he'd lived it. Trying to coordinate shifts, picking up extra hours, managing the chaos of working-class life. It wasn't a billion-dollar idea, but it was solid, useful, and most importantly, it was profitable. 2 years later, he sold that company for enough money to start thinking bigger. The next venture was in fintech, helping gig workers access their earnings instantly instead of waiting for payday. And that one caught fire. Within 3 years, David Chen had gone from night shift warehouse worker to self-made millionaire. His company was acquired by a larger platform in a deal that made tech blogs and created a bank account balance he still sometimes had to check twice to believe was real. At 34 years old, David was everything America claims to celebrate. A bootstrap success story. A kid who made it against the odds through intelligence, creativity, and grinding, relentless work. He diversified into investments, started advising startups, built wealth not just for himself, but for his family, for the community he came from. He set up scholarship funds and mentorship programs because he remembered what it felt like to code in the dark with no one to ask for help. And yes, he bought himself a Ferrari, a blue F8 Tributo to be specific, V8 engine producing 7 and 10 horsepower, A price tag that would have been absolutely incomprehensible to that 19-year-old version of himself, hunched over a flickering laptop. It wasn't about showing off, though he'd be lying if he said there wasn't some satisfaction in it. It was about owning something beautiful, something that represented not just wealth, but achievement, something that proved to himself every single time he turned the key that he'd made it, that the kid from Seattle who'd slept 4 hours a night and lived on coffee and hope had actually done what he set out to do. So there's David on this particular day in late April, driving that Ferrari from Atlanta to Miami, taking the scenic route down the Florida coast. Not because he had to, but because he could. Because he had no meetings scheduled, no deadlines pressing, because sometimes the whole point of success is having the freedom to take the long way. The drive is glorious. Windows down, warm air rushing in, the engine's growl harmonizing with whatever playlist he'd queued up. The kind of afternoon that feels like a movie scene, like proof that life can actually be as good as you hoped it would be. He's dressed for comfort, not for impressing anyone. Gray t-shirt, white sweatpants, sneakers. His hair is short, neat. He's wearing a simple silver watch his mother gave him years ago. He looks like what he is, a guy on a road trip, relaxed and casual, wearing the kind of outfit you choose when you're spending the day in a car and don't care about anything except being comfortable. Around 2 in the afternoon, he pulls off the highway at a small-town gas station, the kind of place with 3 pumps, a convenience store with sun-faded advertisements in the window, and locals who know each other by name. The sun is brilliant, that Florida brightness that makes everything look oversaturated, almost surreal. David pulls up to pump 2, the Ferrari's blue paint gleaming like something out of a dream, and he starts the simple, ordinary process of filling his tank. He doesn't notice the patrol car parked across the street, doesn't see Officer Thomas Martinez watching him with narrowed eyes. That particular law enforcement stare that's evaluating, calculating, making judgments. Martinez had been sitting there finishing his coffee when the Ferrari pulled in, and his attention locked onto it immediately. Not because there was anything suspicious about a car getting gas, but because in Martinez's mind, certain things didn't fit together. And a young Asian man in sweatpants standing next to a $250,000 sports car? That was one of them. Officer Thomas Martinez was 43 years old. He'd been wearing a badge for 18 years. Most of them in this same small town where nothing much ever happened except traffic stops and domestic disturbances, and the occasional drunk and disorderly. He joined the force with what he told people were good intentions, to serve and protect, but over the years, something had calcified in him. A set of assumptions about who belonged where and who was likely to be doing what. He'd never call it prejudice, would bristle at the suggestion, would insist he judged people by their actions, not their appearance. But his actions told a different story, one written in the pattern of whose cars he pulled over, whose IDs he demanded to see, whose explanations he believed, and whose he didn't. When Martinez saw David at that gas pump, his brain didn't compute successful person road tripping in an expensive car. It computed wrong person, wrong car, probable theft. The out-of-state plates only confirmed his suspicion. Texas plates on a Ferrari in small-town Florida. And when the initial registration return came back clean but registered to an address in Austin, Martinez's suspicion hardened into certainty. This didn't add up. A kid in sweatpants didn't own a car like that. Obviously, he'd taken it from someone who did. Martinez activated his body camera, pulled out of his parking spot, and drove the 100 yards to the gas station. His tires crunched on gravel as he parked directly behind the Ferrari, blocking it in. The body cam captured everything from his perspective. The brilliant red of the car, the chrome detailing, the Texas plates, and David, who just finished pumping gas and was capping the tank, completely unaware that he was about to be accused of stealing his own property. David noticed the patrol car when it blocked him in, and he felt it immediately. That familiar tightening in his chest, that instant recalculation of how to hold his hands, how to modulate his voice, how to survive an interaction with someone who has a gun and the authority to use it. He'd done nothing wrong, hadn't been speeding, wasn't parked illegally, wasn't doing anything except existing in public. But he also knew that doing nothing wrong wasn't always protection enough. Martinez got out of his patrol car, his body camera recording, and approached. The first words out of his mouth made his assumptions crystal clear. "That's a $200,000 car, man." His tone was already accusatory, already disbelieving. His hand gestured at the Ferrari like he was identifying evidence at a crime scene. You want to tell me whose keys you're holding? Not, is this your car? Not, can I see your registration? But whose keys are you holding? The phrasing itself revealed that Martinez had already decided David couldn't possibly be the owner, that he must be holding keys that belonged to someone else, that this was already a crime scene and David was already the suspect. David recognized the game immediately. He'd been successful enough, visible enough, that this wasn't his first time dealing with assumptions. The assumption that his wealth must be illegitimate, that someone who looked like him with nice things must have acquired them through theft or fraud or some other criminal enterprise, because the idea of legitimate success was somehow harder to believe than the most elaborate criminal conspiracy. Registration says out of state, Martinez continued, as if this were evidence of wrongdoing rather than evidence that David had driven from another state. Which is, a thing people do regularly in America. You sure this is yours? And there it was. The direct accusation wrapped in a question. The implication that David was lying before he'd even had a chance to tell the truth. David looked at the officer, really looked at him, taking in the body language, the tone, the way Martinez was positioned as if preparing for confrontation. And David made a decision. He could be deferential, could play the game of yes, sir, and no, sir, and hope that compliance would protect him. Or he could stand his ground, assert his dignity, refuse to participate in a humiliation ritual based on nothing but appearance and Martinez's prejudice. I already told you it's mine. His voice was calm, level, but not submissive. He met Martinez's eyes without aggression, but without backing down either. Martinez didn't like that. Didn't like the calm certainty in David's voice. Didn't like that this man wasn't cowering or stammering or giving him the deference he expected. In Martinez's experience, innocent people explained themselves profusely, tripped over their words trying to prove they belonged. Guilty people stayed calm, knew their rights, refused to volunteer information. David's composure in Martinez's calculus was just more evidence that he was hiding something. You understand why that sounds a little unlikely? And there it was, laid bare. It sounded unlikely, not because David had given any false information, not because there was any evidence of theft, but because in Officer Thomas Martinez's mind, young Asian men in sweatpants don't own Ferraris. Therefore, David must be lying. David felt the anger rising, that particular rage that comes from being presumed guilty of your own life. But he channeled it into something colder, sharper. He looked Martinez dead in the eye and said, "Sounds like a problem you got. Not me." It was a perfect response. No curse words, no threats, nothing that could be twisted into disorderly conduct or resisting. Just a clear statement of fact. Martinez's disbelief was Martinez's problem, not David's. David owned the car, he had the registration, the insurance, the keys, every piece of documentation that proved legitimate ownership. If Martinez couldn't believe that someone like David could afford nice things, that was a failure of Martinez's imagination, not a crime on David's part. But Martinez wasn't interested in examining his own biases. He was interested in asserting control, in proving that his authority superseded David's rights, in making this guy understand who was in charge. All right, go ahead and turn around for me. His hand moved to his handcuffs. Put your hands behind your back. David felt the words like a physical blow. He was about to be arrested for owning a car, for existing while Asian in a Ferrari at a Florida gas station. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. If people didn't die in interactions like this. If the wrong move or the wrong word couldn't escalate this into something tragic. Seriously? The word contained volumes. Seriously, you're going to arrest me for this? Seriously, this is where we are in America? Seriously, I have to be handcuffed because you can't imagine that I worked for what I have? Let's go. Turn around. Martinez's voice was harder now, the voice of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't backing down from it, regardless of how wrong it might be. David complied, not because he agreed with the arrest, not because he thought it was lawful, but because he understood the mathematics of police encounters. Resisting, even when you're right, even when the arrest is bogus, can get you hurt or killed. He turned around slowly, his movements deliberate and visible, his hands moving behind his back. Every gesture designed to show he wasn't a threat, that he was cooperating, that there was no reason for this to escalate. The metallic click of handcuffs closing around David's wrists was captured clearly on Martinez's body cam. The camera showed Martinez's hands patting David down, searching for weapons, for drugs, for any evidence that would justify what Martinez had already done. He found nothing. Wallet, phone, car keys on a Ferrari fob, nothing illegal, nothing suspicious, nothing except the possessions of a man on a road trip. David stood there in handcuffs, his Ferrari gleaming beside him, other customers at the gas station staring, and he felt the weight of it all. But he also felt something else. Certainty. He knew how this ended. He knew the registration would prove him right. He knew Martinez was about to experience the particular humiliation of having his prejudice exposed by simple documentation. Martinez walked back to his patrol car, leaving David standing by the Ferrari in handcuffs, and grabbed his radio. The body cam captured his voice clearly. "Dispatch, run the vine on this Ferrari." He read off the vehicle identification number from the car's windshield. That long string of letters and numbers that tells the story of every vehicle ever made. There was a pause, maybe 30 seconds, while the dispatcher ran the information through the system. David waited, his face calm, almost serene. He wasn't worried. He knew exactly what that VIN would return. Then the dispatcher's voice came through, clear and professional, and completely devastating to Martinez's theory. Vehicle returns to a David Chen, valid registration, no warrants, no stolen reports. The body cam captured Martinez's reaction perfectly. His head turned back toward David, then down to the wallet he'd taken during the search. He opened it, pulled out the driver's license, and there it was, David Chen. The same name on the registration, the same face as the man standing in handcuffs, Texas address matching the plates, everything legitimate, everything legal, everything exactly as David had said it was. Martinez stood there for a long moment, the body cam recording his silence, and you could almost see the calculations happening in his mind. He'd handcuffed a man based on nothing but appearance and prejudice. He'd accused someone of theft with zero evidence. He'd detained a citizen unlawfully because his brain couldn't process the reality of a successful young man legitimately owning an expensive car. And he'd done it all on camera. The walk back to David felt longer than it was. Martinez's hands fumbled slightly with the handcuff key, his earlier confidence replaced by something else. Not quite shame, not quite remorse, but recognition that he'd made a mistake. And that mistake was documented. "All right. We're good here." Martinez muttered it while removing the handcuffs, his voice stripped of its earlier authority. Now just the weak attempt of someone trying to save face. "Just checking all the bases, you understand?" David rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been, looking at Martinez with an expression that was neither angry nor forgiving, just exhausted. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I understand exactly what you were checking." He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. They both knew what had just happened, what assumptions had driven it. What Martinez had seen when he looked at David and refused to believe. "Can I go now?" It wasn't really a question. Martinez nodded, already backing away, already trying to put distance between himself and this encounter that had gone so spectacularly wrong. "Yeah, drive safe." David watched him retreat to his patrol car, then calmly retrieved his phone. He opened his notes app and typed quickly. "Officer Thomas Martinez. Badge number visible on the body cam footage. Unlawful detention. Racial profiling. False accusation of vehicle theft." He took photos of the patrol car, the badge number, the scene. He wasn't angry. Or rather, he was angry, but also methodical, already thinking several steps ahead to what came next. Because this wasn't over. Not for David. And certainly not for Officer Martinez. 3 days later, David filed a formal complaint with the police department, accompanied by a detailed written statement describing the encounter. He was specific about the timeline, about what Martinez had said and done, about the fact that the detention was based solely on Martinez's disbelief that someone like David could own the car he was driving. He requested copies of the body cam footage under Florida public records law. The department's Internal Affairs Division had no choice but to investigate. The body cam footage told an unambiguous story. An officer had detained and handcuffed a citizen with no reasonable suspicion of any crime, based purely on the assumption that the citizen's appearance and the vehicle's value were incompatible. Constitutional law was clear on this. You can't detain someone because you don't believe they could afford their own property. You need actual evidence of actual criminal activity. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, other complaints about Officer Martinez surfaced, a pattern emerging from the records that Internal Affairs had previously filed away or dismissed. Multiple incidents of disproportionately stopping minority drivers, questions about his use of suspicious behavior as justification for stops that looked a lot more like profiling than policing. The Ferrari incident wasn't an aberration. It was the most blatant example of a long-standing pattern. Officer Thomas Martinez was suspended pending the investigation's conclusion. When the findings came back, they were damning. The detention of David Chen was found to be unlawful, a violation of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable search and seizure. The handcuffing was found to be excessive force, given the complete absence of any threatening behavior or evidence of crime. And the pattern of similar stops suggested not an isolated error in judgment, but a systemic bias in Martinez's policing. He was terminated, not quietly retired, not allowed to resign, but fired. His personnel file marked in a way that would make it nearly impossible for him to be hired by another department. His career in law enforcement, 18 years of it, ended because he couldn't believe that David Chen owned a Ferrari. But David wasn't done. He retained a civil rights attorney, one who specialized in Fourth Amendment violations and police misconduct. And he filed a federal lawsuit against both Officer Martinez and the department that had employed him. The lawsuit detailed the unlawful detention, the racial profiling, the violation of David's civil rights, and the emotional distress of being handcuffed and publicly humiliated based on nothing but appearance and assumption. The city's attorneys reviewed the body cam footage, consulted with their own experts, and came to an uncomfortable conclusion. They would lose this case. A jury watching that footage would see exactly what David had experienced, a man treated as a criminal for the crime of success. The optics were terrible, the law was clear, and the damages could be substantial. They approached David's attorney with a settlement offer. The final settlement amount was sealed as part of the agreement, but people familiar with civil rights cases estimated it was well into 6 figures, possibly higher. More importantly for David, the settlement included a consent decree requiring the department to implement mandatory bias training, to revise their policies on stops and detentions, and to create a civilian oversight board to review complaints of profiling. It was the kind of change that might prevent the next David Chen from being handcuffed at a gas station, and that mattered more than the money. 6 months after that April afternoon, David was back on the road in his Ferrari, windows down, music playing, driving north along the California coast. He'd thought about selling the car after what happened, wondered if it was worth the hassle, worth the inevitable stares and questions and assumptions. But then he decided that selling it would be letting Officer Martinez win, would be admitting that he should make himself smaller, less visible, less successful to avoid the prejudice of people who couldn't imagine excellence in someone who looked like him. So he kept the car. And every time he drove it, every time someone did a double take or lingered too long with their stare, he thought about Officer Thomas Martinez and the math that didn't add up. He thought about a man so trapped in his prejudices that he couldn't see reality even when it was parked directly in front of him. He thought about how much that miscalculation had cost: a career, a reputation, a city's treasury, and most importantly, the dignity of a citizen who'd done everything right and was still treated like a criminal. The body cam that Martinez had activated, thinking it would document his proper police work, had instead become the irrefutable evidence of his bias. Every word, every gesture, every assumption captured in high definition, impossible to deny or spin or explain away. The technology meant to protect officers from false accusations had exposed a true one. And there was a certain justice in that. David had learned something from that day at the gas station, beyond the obvious lesson that prejudice was alive and well in America. He'd learned that documentation mattered, that staying calm mattered, that knowing your rights and standing firm in them could make the difference between injustice going unchallenged and injustice being exposed, sanctioned, and hopefully prevented from happening again. He'd also learned that success, real success, the kind you build yourself from nothing, wasn't just about the bank account or the car or the accolades. It was about dignity, about refusing to shrink yourself to fit someone else's limited imagination, about insisting on being seen for who you actually were, rather than who prejudice expected you to be. Officer Martinez had looked at David and seen a thief, had looked at the Ferrari and seen stolen property, had looked at the situation and seen exactly what his biases told him to see. Reality be damned. And that failure of vision, that inability to imagine that a young man in sweatpants could be exactly who he claimed to be, had cost Martinez everything. The lesson was clear, even if not everyone was ready to learn it. In America, driving while different shouldn't be a crime. Owning nice things while defying stereotypes shouldn't trigger an investigation. Success shouldn't have to come with a disclaimer or an explanation or a stack of documentation proving you earned what you have. But until that lesson penetrates deeply enough, until officers like Thomas Martinez become the exception rather than the rule, people like David Chen will keep getting stopped, questioned, detained, and handcuffed for the crime of not fitting into someone else's narrow expectations of what success looks like. David drove on, the Pacific Ocean glittering to his left, the Ferrari's engine humming beneath him. And he thought about all the young people who'd hear his story, who'd understand that the road to success was already hard enough without having to constantly prove you didn't steal your own life. He thought about Officer Martinez wherever he was now and wondered if he'd learned anything, if he'd looked at that body cam footage and finally seen what David had known from the beginning. That prejudice isn't just wrong, it's expensive. The body cam had told the truth. The registration had told the truth. And in the end, the truth had been costly for everyone except the man who'd been telling it all along. David smiled slightly, downshifted as he took a curve along the coast, and accelerated into the California sunshine. The Ferrari responding instantly to his touch, his car, his success, his life. And no amount of disbelief from officers like Thomas Martinez could change that fact. The math had always added up. Some people just refused to do the calculation. And that's how a single moment of prejudice cost everything. David kept driving, kept succeeding, kept proving that the math always added up. Some people just refused to calculate it. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been judged for your success? Have you ever had to prove you earned what's yours? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're bringing you more real stories about dignity, justice, and people who refuse to be small just to make others comfortable. Next week, we've got another story that'll blow your mind. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, your success is not a crime, and you never have to apologize for what you've earned. I'll see you in the next one.